Hey, this is Khan, you're watching Ninja Pulls, and welcome back to another quick video on Update 47. Week 2's patch notes didn't contain much, as is often the case with Week 2, and we'll go over those in just a few minutes, but first, we got a separate update from ZOS over on the official forums, saying that they have listened to the community feedback and are changing course on some of the unpopular changes from Week 1. That is obviously great news, and let's jump right into that forum post. I won't read the whole thing, but just the key bits. Hello all, we understand that having to continually update builds with every patch can be tiresome and can detract from the fun and enjoyment of playing the way you want, something that is a part of ESO's DNA. In considering the community's feedback, we will be making the following changes starting in an upcoming week of the Update 47 PTS, sometime after PTS Week 2. 1. Since the release of Update 46, our aim has been to prevent excessive ultimate generation by limiting the newer sources that subclassing introduced, but with a more targeted approach that doesn't hurt those who aren't subclassing. An upcoming PTS update will address the feedback we've seen with the following adjustment. All class passives that were adjusted to a major or minor heroism effect are now once again unique ultimate sources. However, the passive abilities that generated minor heroism during Week 1 will now share a cooldown, so they cannot be stacked. We originally discussed this before the Week 1 changes, but feared the gameplay experience with these effects would result in confusing and jarring gameplay experiences since passive cooldowns cannot be messaged clearly, but we've seen a lot of discussion that suggests we likely over-worried about that. So, in case anybody wasn't already clear on this, the original idea in PTS Week 1 was to take all of the unique class passives for generating ultimate and change them to give you minor heroism instead for X number of seconds. The amount of ultimate generated remained the same, but you'd be getting it via a buff instead of generating the ultimate outright. So if you already had minor heroism on you, all these class passives would essentially be deleted. And I want to stress that this was not going to be a huge nerf or anything like that. I bet many players wouldn't even have noticed the difference in many situations. So the community's objection to this change was not just a bunch of endgamers with OP builds crying about losing DPS, as I've seen many comments suggesting. No, it wasn't about that at all. And honestly, it almost never is. This wasn't about a loss of power, but concern over the direction for the game. Players didn't want a version of ESO with all the interesting layers and variety stripped away. Once you look at it that way, this reversal is a very welcome change. ZOS are still capping the rate at which we can generate ultimate and not letting us stack these passives post-subclassing, which was their goal, but they found another way to do it which doesn't step on the fun, the depth, and the complexity of the combat system, which would not have been in anyone's interest. Look, I understand there might be some players out there who say they'd prefer a simpler combat system in ESO, and that's fine. But to them, I would say that this change, as it was originally proposed, would not have made ESO easier to play or easier to understand. It would just have made it less interesting and less fun. Case closed, I think. Next. 2. We'll also be introducing a failsafe for the Arcanist's class mastery script with Banner Bearer. So it's not a complete loss of power. It will generate ultimate if the effect did not generate a crux. Again, a very welcome change of direction. The original proposal effectively made it pointless to run class mastery and inspired scholarship on an Arcanist. And again, the backlash was not necessarily against the power loss, but about a cool and interesting interaction being made redundant. Taking one of the only class mastery scripts worth using in PvE and throwing it in the bin. Just like the ulti-gen changes, this one was also greeted with dismay and rejected outright by a lot of players. And once more, it's not about damage nerfs. As far as I can tell, we pretty much all agree that Arcanist damage, and damage in general, should probably come down a bit after subclassing. But as before, this shouldn't be accomplished by removing useful tools and interesting features from the combat system. Even before subclassing, I saw the occasional complaint the classes had become way too homogeneous since hybridization a few years ago, and now that subclassing has arrived, this complaint is inevitably a lot more widespread. It was always going to be a bit of a trade-off, but the reason many of us play this game is the variety and freedom afforded by the combat system, and the depth that's been built into it from the start. so the players that enjoy it and want to can get better and better, learn more, and really master the gameplay. Of course, this mastery doesn't vanish overnight if Arcanist banner goes away, but that's the general direction in which the devs seem to be moving, hence the backlash. This change fixes that somewhat by not making class mastery redundant alongside inspired scholarship, because if you don't get Crux, you'll generate ultimate instead. Personally, I would still love to see a version of ESO where the Arcanist class mastery gets to keep its guaranteed Crux, and instead of making it conditional, ZOS could maybe increase the cooldown or something like that. More importantly, as by far and away the most popular class mastery script, the devs would then use this as a sort of blueprint or standard and try to rework the other class mastery scripts which are being ignored and raise them up to this level of utility and fun. Same with the class sets from Infinite Archive while we're on the subject. If they were more fun and worthwhile to use, it would go some way to alleviate the dissatisfaction many people have expressed over subclassing and the erasure of class identity, which some of us don't really care about, but which is super important to others. But anyway, this isn't supposed to be a video about my ideas, but what ZOS said in their forum post. Finally, we'll be looking at our Sorcerer adjustments and reiterating and reverting some of the adjustments based on your feedback. Lightning Form will again grant Major Resolve instead of Minor Force to retain its unique damage/defensive hybrid effect. I was delighted and a little surprised to see Major Resolve coming back to Hurricane and Boundless Storm, because honestly, this change wasn't really that weird or that bad. I didn't like it, and I was far from alone, but that was more to do with Hurricane being an awesome skill that I enjoy and had become used to using. If you'd asked me to make the case against all these changes, it would have been much harder for me to present a coherent argument against this one than, for example, the Ultigen passives or Banner Bearer. I guess Minor Force is very freely available, so again, that change felt a little bit pointless, but one of the other objections was that it unfairly nerfs Sorcerer players who aren't subclassing, and this is a thing that keeps coming up. The people are grumpy about base classes getting nerfed because of individual abilities which are fine within that class toolkit, but once you open it all up to subclassing, they become outliers and represent a problem for balance. Sadly, this is inevitable because of the way ZOS have implemented subclassing, but I understand that it doesn't seem quite fair, and if this is the combat team trying to limit that effect, I can appreciate that. Bound Armor will again grant minor protection at base rather than Major Resolve. Additionally, the active effect of the abilities will now scale in duration with your armor rather than a flat amount. The max magicka and stamina increase from the ability and its morphs have been moved to Dark Magic, which will exist on the Blood Magic passive. Bound armaments will have a higher chance of applying Sundered, so it reaches a closer power level to the Grim Focus morphs. Again, this is a straight-up reversion of the Week 1 changes, except that Bound Armaments is still losing its unique stat buff, and instead that's going to another Sorcerer skill line, Dark Magic. So once again, Sorcerer players who aren't using subclassing won't lose anything. In fact, they gain some free stats and won't have to slot Bound Armaments to get them. Blood Magic is the passive that heals you when you cast Crystal Fragments or any Dark Magic ability, and it's not clear whether the max magicka and stamina will always be present, or whether you need to cast Dark Magic abilities to get those as well. We'll have to wait and see, but I expect they'll always be present, which would be great. Meanwhile, Armaments is getting a bit of a buff with a higher chance to proc Sundered, which can be pretty meaningful, considering it ticks 4 times per hit and Sundered has no cooldown. I also want to draw your attention to the fact that they're taking power from one skill line and moving it to another skill line, one which has been neglected post-subclassing because it had a bunch of utilities and not enough power. This is a step towards fixing that by reallocating some of the Sorcerer's power in a way which doesn't hurt those who stick with a pure class and skip subclassing. I've also said on several occasions how the devs could potentially solve a lot of the difficulties and current problems with subclassing by spreading the power around between skill lines. So we don't have these standouts like Herald of the Tome or Assassination, where almost everything is amazing for a damage dealer because we're just gonna pick those skill lines almost every time. If we can spread things out a bit, so that every skill line is at least worth considering, That would turn down some of the power creep that we've seen. It would also increase build diversity and balance, and crucially, make the meta more interesting. It would be a lot of work, and I know it wouldn't be a silver bullet that fixes everything, but it still seems like a solid concept to me, and if this is a small glimpse of the devs taking that approach, I'm definitely on board, and I really hope that it pays off, in which case we'll all be very interested to see what they do next. The sign-off to the forum post goes like this. As we mentioned before the release of Update 46 and subclassing, we will continue to work on tuning these abilities to achieve greater class balance. It's worth noting that the changes above are also subject to change, and we'll continue listening to your feedback before these go live. In the months ahead, we are going to continue to look at balancing and will make additional adjustments. For now, we hope these amended abilities are more in line with your expectations and you continue to enjoy subclassing. Thank you again for all the thoughtful and constructive discourse around the Update 47 PTS changes. Your input is valuable, and these adjustments are a direct result. Please continue to let us know how your experience is on the PTS. We're listening. Good stuff. I don't want to get all mushy here, but I'll draw your attention back to that line. Thank you for all the thoughtful and constructive discourse around the Update 47 PTS changes. Your input is valuable, and these adjustments are a direct result. What they're saying is, the ESO community did this. Good job, guys. High fives all round. We absolutely got much of what we wanted here, and I definitely think it'll be better for the game in the long run. Also, let's be real, it's not every day that game developers from any studio choose to describe a player backlash as thoughtful and constructive. Before we finish, a quick note on the Week 2 patch notes. None of the changes we've just talked about are in there, they won't be coming until Week 3 at the earliest. But they also reverted the Baylog change, where you could not activate the set out of combat. This is clearly part of the same course correction as these other changes, but it was quick enough to implement that it made it into Week 2. Here's the rationale. We're reverting the changes made in Week 1 of PTS because this is a unique case of consistency versus context, as seen in many discussions brought up this past week. Normally, we don't want to allow item sets to activate out of combat if they offer a duration effect that can enable alpha strikes. Additionally, we normally don't want to allow a set to retain its effect while no longer wearing the set and has not been designed to operate as a backbar set. We used an in-combat requirement to curtail this experience, but in this case, you cannot unequip the set while retaining the effect, and almost all ultimate casts that directly grant an alpha strike also remove things like sneak and invisibility before their impact. Originally, this was done for the sake of consistency, but the context shows this set does not need this stipulation. No need for me to comment further except to say that context is absolutely key. Some of the changes proposed by ZOS over the years, I can imagine they make total sense when you look at a spreadsheet, but when you're a player reading these proposed changes, they make absolutely no sense at all. Context is everything. The other notable thing in Week 2 was that Rakat's Void Mantle will no longer work with Overload, the Sorcerer ultimate which turns your light and heavy attacks into lightning bolts. You can activate that ultimate during off-balance phases to boost your DPS by quite a bit, another fun little interaction which makes an otherwise slow and steady rotation into something a bit more dynamic for those who want it, without really making it much more difficult. Unfortunately, again, this is another outlier, and apparently not how the set was originally supposed to work. So now on the PTS, if you activate Overload with Void Mantle equipped, it will no longer inherit that 50% bonus damage. I confess this change won't affect me, but I can clearly see why some players aren't thrilled about it. If you're one of them, maybe you'll be encouraged by all the reversions we already went through in this video and will go and make your case to the devs. There was more in the Week 2 patch notes, but it's mostly a bunch of tweaks and fixes for the new dungeons, as well as some stuff around the new Writhing Wall event. I'll be putting out another super detailed but spoiler-free video on that very soon. Update 47 will go live on August 18th for PC and September 3rd for consoles. And until then, if there are any more interesting twists and turns during the PTS cycle, I'll be sure to update you all right here. If you appreciate that, please remember to support Ninja Pulls in any way you can. We're trying to get to the point where Maya and I can both devote ourselves to this full time, to bring you more and more of the very finest content and awesome events like Tenfest all year round. Thank you so much to all those who have already supported us this year. You guys are amazing. And with that, I will say thank you for watching, I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.